In this chapter, we'll talk about the lymphatic system, which has different functions. Some of them overlap with the immune system. Now, the lymphatic system is mainly a system of vessels, very similar to the blood vessels. However, those vessels are not carrying blood, they are carrying a fluid. This fluid, we'll call it the lymph. And the lymph is what we call like kind of the extra fluid between the cells. It takes this fluid and put it back into the blood. So this is the main component of the lymphatic system, those vessels. But also we have cells and we have organs that part of this lymphatic system. As we said, this fluid, we call it the lymph, and that is usually the excessive fluid that kind of moving out of the blood for various reasons into between the cells. So the lymphatic system will take it back and put it into the blood. The main type of organs there, we have the lymph nodes, and those lymph nodes are small bean-shaped organs located all over the body, and they will contribute to the functions of the lymphatic system and mainly to the immune system. Now, as I said, the major function of the lymphatic system is to drain these bloody fluids and return them to the bloodstream. And again, why do we have fluids outside the blood vessels? Because of the blood pressure. The blood pressure will cause some of this fluid to move to the interstitial space. This is the space between the cells, and it can accumulate there, which we don't want it to happen. So the lymphatic system will take that fluid back and put it into the blood. Other functions, mainly immune functions, because the lymph nodes will host the T cells and the B cells, and also the lymphatic system or the lymphatic vessels will be used by the immune cells to get transported. So those are functions of the immune system. Now, the main thing about the lymphatic vessels that they are different than the blood vessels. In the blood, we said we have the blood capillaries, the venules, the arterioles. They will come and connect through the blood capillaries, and they will go back to the venules. So the blood comes through the arteriole, through the blood capillaries or the capillary beds, then to the venule, back to the heart. So kind of a circle, right? From the heart back to the heart. For the lymphatic system, we don't have this setting. So what we will have here, and instead of this continuation, we will have like dead ends. One end or one opening that the fluid is drained into there. So the lymphatic system doesn't circulate the lymph. Okay, there is no circulation in the lymph. No, it takes them in one direction back to the heart. In the heart, this lymph will get mixed with the blood, and then the blood will distribute that fluid all over the body again. Okay, so it will be like lymph, blood, lymph again, blood again, and so on. So this is one big difference between the lymphatic vessels and the cardiovascular system or the blood vessels. Those lymph vessels also, they have valves to prevent the lymph from going backward. So there is only one way of the lymph moving into those blood vessels or within those blood vessels. And as you can see, all of those small circles, all of those are lymph nodes. So this fluid that passing through those blood vessels will pass through several of those lymph nodes before it reaches the heart. We have around 500 to 600 of those lymph nodes. So here again, that's what we are talking about. So there is the arteriole, the capillary bed, and between those capillary beds we have the lymph capillaries. Those are, as we said, they are one way entrance per se. So the lymph or the fluid will be drained there, and then it will go back to the heart. So in the heart, there are two areas where it will pour. It will open to the right subclavian and left subclavian veins. So all of this fluid coming from most of the body technically will go to the left, and part of it will go to the right. But eventually it will get into the superior vena cava, and then it will get mixed with the blood and redistributed again. Now, what are the cells of the lymphatic system? Those are called the lymphoid cells, and those are two types. We have the white blood cells. Those are within the lymphoid tissues. So those are the lymphoid cells. And then we have the cells that form the lymphoid tissue itself. So those cells mainly that will give us the fibers, mainly the reticular fibers. So those mainly are fibroblast cells. So those are, since they are giving reticular fibers in the lymphoid tissue, or forming the lymphoid tissue, so those are cells of the lymphatic system. So those are the two groups of lymphoid cells. So for the lymphocytes or the white blood cells, this is something you are already familiar with. We have the lymphocyte T cells and B cells. Those will detect the foreign antigen, will deal with virus infections, bacterial infections, red blood cells, mismatched red blood cells, cancer cells. We have macrophages, those are phagocytotic cells. We have dendritic cells, those are also phagocytes, the antigens or the bacteria, and present them to the T cells. So those are all the lymphoid cells. Now for the organs, we have primary organs and we have secondary organs. For the primary organs, those are the bone marrow and the thymus gland. Those are where the lymphocytes are produced, as you know, and mature. If you remember, we said for the B cells, B and T cells produced in bone marrow, B cells matured or maturation in bone marrow, T cells will mature in the thymus gland. Therefore, the bone marrow and the thymus glands, those are the primary lymphoid organs. So this is a picture of the bone marrow. This is the area of the bone marrow where those lymphocytes are produced. This is the thymus. We know the thymus would be like big one or prominent in kids, and it atrophies as we get aged, and atrophies as we get older. So those are the two primary primary lymphoid organs. Then we have the secondary lymphoid organs, and those are, we can put them like in three groups. We have the lymph nodes, we have the spleen, and we have the lymphoid nodules. Now all of them will share the same structure but with different variations. For the lymphoid nodes, those are the most important one. What you will have, usually they are surrounded by a connective tissue. This will form a capsule. This is mainly for protection. But then there is the cortex. This is the superficial layer of the lymph node. So it's all the cortex. And from this cortex, it will give extensions toward the inner region. Those are the trabeculae. The inner region, we call it the medulla. And the medulla is mainly reticular fibers. So those reticular fibers will form a mesh or like a network. Okay, so the white blood cells will be sitting on those reticular fibers. The function of those reticular fibers is to slow down. So inside, we said in the medulla we have reticular fibers. Their function is to slow down the speed of the lymph. Why? To allow, this is important, to allow lymphocytes to examine antigens. To allow the lymphocytes to examine the antigens and then decide if it's self versus non-self antigens. So as we said earlier, the lymph would pass through those nodules. Here we will have the white cells and the white blood cells, the B and T cells, distributed between the trabeculae or between the chambers of the trabeculae and the medulla. They will examine the antigens and then decide if it's self or non-self, and therefore get activated or just let it go. And by the way, like usually the T cells are here in the around the cortex or toward the cortex. The B cells are inside in the medulla. Okay, so that's how the setting is. Okay, then another important structure of the lymph node is the afferent lymphatic vessels and the efferent lymphatic vessels. So each node will have 3 to 5 afferent. Those are bringing lymph into the lymph node, and 2 to 3 efferent, taking the lymph out. So there is always more lymph coming, less lymph leaving. More coming, less leaving. What is the purpose of this? The purpose is also to slow down, to cause like a jam, to slow down the speed of the lymph. We earlier said we have the reticular fibers. They are going to slow down the speed of the lymph. But now also that there are more coming and less leaving, that also will cause a crowd. So that will also slow down the speed of the lymph. Think of it like this, that you have a highway. This highway is like 3 or 4 lanes, but they are moving into 2 lanes. So at this area, there will be like a kind of a jam. So that's the same idea, to slow down the speed of the lymph. Why we need to slow it down? Because again, the T cells and B cells need some time to examine the antigens. So that is all about the lymph nodes. Those are the most important one. And basically that is maybe the most important thing I want you to understand from this chapter, which is the structure of the lymph node. The spleen also is a lymphoid organ. This is a secondary lymphoid organ. The the spleen has a very similar structure, although it's a bigger organ. We have connective tissue surrounding the spleen. Then we have, instead of cortex and medulla, we will have the red pulp and the white pulp. The red pulp is the area for the red blood cells. If you remember, we said the spleen is a graveyard of the red blood cells. So that's all happening here. The white pulp, that is where we will find the white blood cells. And again, the lymph will pass through it, and that will get examined, by the white blood cells. So those white blood cells, it's not really like T cells and B cells. So those usually would result in non-specific immune responses. So we'll have mainly macrophages there. There are some B cells and T cells, of course, but mainly they will be macrophages. So it's kind of a filtration system. But, or think of it like this, the filtration arm of the immune system. Okay? So that is what's happening in the white pulp. Then the last group of lymphoid organs is the lymphoid nodules. And those are, they have kind of a simpler structure comparing to the spleen and the lymphoid nodes. Sometimes they will have the capsule, sometimes there is no capsule, sometimes they will have the reticular fibers within this capsule, sometimes they are just reticular fibers without any capsule. And those are coming in three forms. We have the tonsils, we have the mucosa-associated lymphoid tissue, and the bronchus-associated lymphoid tissue. For the tonsils, those are clusters of those lymphoid cells that host white blood cells, B cells and T cells. Usually those are associated with the oral cavity and connected to the pharynx, also connected to the back of the nose. So in the area back of the nose, back of the mouth. This is the tongue. The nose is somewhere here. Okay, so we will have the palatine tonsil, we have the lingual tonsil, and we have pharyngeal tonsils. So the three of them, the palatine, those two, the lingual, and also the pharyngeal, all of them will get the swell in terms of infection. Whether it's like a cold, for example, or other types of bacterial infection, those will get the swell. Why do they swell? Because there are plenty of white blood cells coming into this area, trying to, to fight the infection. So this will be like a battleground. So there will be plenty of fluid, plenty of cells. That's why they will swell. So those are the tonsils. For the mucosa-associated lymphoid tissue, this refers to the mucus layer that covers or lines the internal cavities of the body. Like, for example, in the this one specifically, this one is for the gastrointestinal tract. So this one will find it all over the alimentary canal, which is basically the digestive organs, mouth, esophagus, to the stomach, to the large and small intestine. So all of those are lined with the mucosa. Okay, so this mucosa is kind of a layer that any debris can get trapped there, whether it's a virus, bacteria. In case we need to absorb it, it will pass through the mucosa. But if something is not absorbable, then it will get trapped by the mucosa, and then the macrophages will come and eliminate them. Okay, so that's the mucosa. The malt specifically is for the gastrointestinal tract. Usually we will call them in the small intestine, or even in the large intestine, we call them Bayer patches. So those are form of the malt. Then there is another form for the respiratory system. Those are the bronchus-associated lymphoid tissues. The malt, kind of the same concept. The mucus is covering the trachea and the bronchus of the trachea. So again, anything that, we are inhaling, sand, debris, pollen, will get trapped into this mucus layer, and therefore prevented from going further into the lung. And then later we will push it out through the nose or through the mouth. Okay, so that's the pulse, again, part of the protection or the defense layers or protection layers of the body. So that's it for this chapter. This is a small chapter. Let me know if you have any question.